The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is Bill Maddox from the Carsey School of Public Policy here in Durham, New Hampshire. And I'd like to welcome you to another in the ongoing series of SMDP, Sustainable Microenterprise and Development Program webinars. I'm really glad to have you here today. We have a really interesting topic and guest who I'll describe to you in a minute. I want to, as usual, make a few announcements and let you know about some upcoming things and give you some of the rules of the road for how we'll conduct this webinar. Let me tell you, first of all, on your screen that you can see, we're advertising a workshop we're going to be doing in Rwanda, SMTP Rwanda Certificate. This program is almost full. We do have a few more seats, and so if you're interested in learning more, registering, go to the Carsey School of Public Policy website under Rwanda Certificate, SMDP, and you can get more information about the workshop. In particular, we will be sponsoring a workshop related to today's webinar with Mark Bavois, which is Private Service Provider Model, a practical approach to fee-for-service savings group programming. And this is a pilot, first time that we have run this course with CRS, and the first time they've offered it publicly, other than a one-day training they did at the SEEP annual conference last week. So we're really excited about this, and it's going to be a great opportunity to get a master trainer like Mark to teach this methodology, which is really exciting and potentially a game changer for the field. So I'll come back to that, to the workshop and to Mark in just a minute. I also want to remind everybody that this workshop, or I'm sorry, webinar series continues. We will have 2 more webinars this year, this calendar year. The next upcoming webinar is going to be looking at Sharia compliant microfinance, what and where it is, and what can it teach the rest of us. Thursday, November 19th, 9:30 to 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, GMT -5. And this will be with Malcolm Harper, who is one of our Carsey Fellows, at the Cranfield, also at the Cranfield School of Management, and a great thinker and writer in the microfinance field for the last 20 years or so. So hopefully you can join that. The registration will go up in a week or so for that webinar. And then finally, wrapping up the webinar series for 2014, will be financing options for social enterprise on Wednesday, December 10th, also at 9:30 -5 GMT, with Drew Tolchin, Social Enterprise Associates. Drew is one of the leaders in the social enterprise field, both in the States and globally, and one of the people that's helping to promote the idea of B corporations and helping people to look at double and triple bottom line businesses as a new way of doing business to help grease the wheels of both social change and commerce. So we're excited about that. Hope to be announcing several more webinars in this series for next year, including some webinars that we have to dive deeper into topics and extend the topic for more than the hour to a couple of hours, so like mini courses. And we also will be looking at some other exciting changes in SMBP and our savings group work that we've been doing in Africa, which we'll be announcing hopefully by the end of this year or early next year. I also wanted to mention that we're part of another webinar series that is being sponsored by Oxfam America and SEEP, along with CARSI School of Public Policy, specifically focused on savings group topics for practitioners. That series took a little bit of a break, but we'll be back again sometime in October. We'll announce 2 or 3 more webinars, and then eventually be able to announce a date and a place for the next Savings Group Conference, Savings Group 2015, which we're really excited about. We're working on that, and hopefully we'll be able to have the webinars be a way of helping us to crystallize some of the ideas of what people want to learn about and the things that are most important from that standpoint. So we'll, as I said, give you more information on that later on. We're really pleased to be able to have this webinar today with Mark Lavoie. Mark is I would say a rock star among the savings group practitioners. He's really well known for his thoughtfulness, his kind of meticulous attention to detail, and his real focus on what's been really an important part of our work here at CARSI and SMBP for years on really understanding what poor people need and listening to them. So this model of the private service provider model, which Mark is going to describe, is a great way of looking at how we can scale up savings group promotion and use a franchise and entrepreneurial model to put the growth of groups in the hands of private service providers out in the community, and be able to look at ways for facilitating agencies to drop their costs and reach more people and have more effective programs. So as usual, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Mark in a minute, but I just want to remind people that as the webinar proceeds, if you're interested in asking a question, you'll see on your GoToWebinar box a question box. You can start typing those questions in whenever you like. I'll moderate those questions at the end of the webinar and ask Mark the questions and try to identify you as best possible. So who is Mark? Mark has a dozen years of pro-poor microfinance experience. He currently serves as Catholic Relief Services Microfinance Regional Technical Advisor for East Africa. He directed the project that piloted the PSP model and wrote the PSP implementation manual, which will be used in the course in Rwanda, and you can actually download it from, I think we'll actually put a link up on the recording for this webinar so you can get at it, or at the CRS site. Currently, he leads CRS's internal capacity building on the Silk PSP model and is the technical and training lead for CRS's EFI project, which will reach over 500,000 members using the PSP approach, with an emphasis on the very poor. Previously, Mark led Freedom from Hunger's savings group work, contributing to the development of the Saving for Change replicator strategy and manuals. So we're really happy to have Mark with us today. Mark is also, as I mentioned, going to be the trainer for the workshop we're going to be offering in Rwanda in a few weeks, and really anxious to hear about this model and the work that CRS and Mark and his colleagues have been doing. And I want to remind you, we hope you stick around for the entire webinar, but if you, for some reason, can't, we are going to be offering, as with previous webinars, a recording of this. But sticking around and asking questions and being part of it would be a great thing. So without further ado, I'd like to have Mark take over here. Mark, welcome to the SMBP webinar series, and I'm really happy you're here and anxious to hear about the PSP model.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill. Good day or good afternoon or good evening to everyone on this webinar. I'm very glad to be here. And thanks to the CARSI School of Public Policy for inviting CRS to share some of our experiences with everyone on the call. So CRS, as many development organizations, have really turned to savings groups as either the lead or the entry point intervention for microfinance programming. And CRS has certainly found that savings groups as a methodology are a good product for remote and rural populations, given the focus on savings, the easy accumulation of lump sums, access to credit, as well as the social capital that is engendered between members. And we've also found it's a good fit from a delivery perspective, as it doesn't require working with financial specialists. Most of the work is focused on training, and it can be easily delivered alongside other interventions in integrated programming. So as a result, demand is high for this product among the populations that we serve, and CRS, as others, have a genuine desire to reach scale with this approach. So I'll speak today about our approach to a delivery strategy. So the question is, what is the best way to ensure that all those who want to be in a savings group can do so and receive the necessary support to succeed? So we found that typically projects are too short for anyone to be able to meet total demand, both in terms of reaching saturation and also due to the fact that the early adopters might be some risk takers, others sit a little bit on the sidelines, and it's after they win the first share out that people really become interested in participating. So demand really grows over time. Our solution is to invest in local people who will become independent agents available over the long term, including post-project, to satisfy demand. Many organizations have strategies that speak to this, to working with local agents, including the village agent approach, replicators, and volunteers. CRS's model is the PSP, or Private Service Provider model. So I'm going to show a timeline for the chronology of how a PSP model is rolled out. CRS developed this model over the period 2008 to 2012 with my colleague Guy Van Minen taking the lead in formulating the approach. And since then we've been able to document the approach extensively in the form of the PSP implementation manual that Bill referenced. So I'm going to show now this chronological timeline on a little diagram, and that will give me a chance to then discuss the processes and tools CRS and its partners use to implement the PSP SIL project, and hopefully that will be, in addition to people who want to take up the approach entirely, food for thought for other implementers who work with agent models and can glean some insights from there. So in terms of the timeline, the first element is a preparatory period during which the project really is finalizing all the design elements that it's set up, including the stipends paid to agents. The staffing is going to deploy the outreach targets, etc. Very important in the preparatory phase are the mapping, which is to choose where to operate, where to place agents, and how to set them to deploy, and we'll talk about that in some length. The recruitment of agents and the training on the savings group methodology, in our case the SILK methodology. Once agents are deployed in the field, they operate as what we call FAs, field agents. And at that moment, the project is paying them a modest amount, represented by the $, and these agents are offering free services in the community. They are mobilizing groups, training them and supporting them, and the groups do not have to pay for this. We typically give agents mode of transportation to increase their area of operation. Whenever possible, we use bicycles. There have been other cases where we've had to give animals for agents to navigate difficult terrains. In addition to the support provided by the mode of transport and the stipend, agents are closely supervised during their period as field agents. And this, as we'll see, is both for technical preparation, so they could become very good at doing their work of savings group formation, but also market preparation to really set the stage for their transition. This period of field agents lasts anywhere between 7 to 9 months, depending on the readiness of the agent. After 7 to 9 months, the project administers an exam to the field agents. Those who are successful become PSP's, private service providers. At that moment, they are no longer paid. These same agents are no longer paid by the project to set up new groups. Rather, they are engaging the community, and the community is mobilizing modest funding to pay for the services of the agents. After a time, the PSPs are organized into networks of peers for mutual support, and when needed, PSPs recruit apprentices. Basically, in the event the number of project-trained agents is not sufficient to meet demand, PSPs will enroll helpers who later on become PSPs. So many people on the call might be familiar with the village agent model, which is a two-level model. Field officers first form groups. From those groups, recruit village agents. What we have is a two-hat model where the same person recruited from the community starts as a project-paid agent and transitions to an independent group-paid agent. Over time, there could be a second level when some PSPs decide to recruit apprentices. So that lays the stage for the rollout of a PSP project, looking at the career of an agent, if you will. And now let's look at some selected processes and tools that we use to implement this type of project. So the first really important process is mapping, which is to choose where to run the project and, more importantly, where to choose the agents from. We don't expect that people are going to relocate, so we take them where they live and we want to work with them. So we have to choose where we pick them from and how much space we give them. So our approach is not population-based. Population-based would be saying we're selecting one agent for every X household. So an agent for every 100 households, an agent for every 500 households. Since that would apply that an agent has a certain number of years in which to operate to saturate his or her market. Rather, we have a geographic-based approach whereby an agent is given a radius of operation surrounding their location. And that radius is chosen given the expectation of mobility based on the terrain in which they operate, flat terrain. I'm seeing sound is broken, poor connection. Sorry, I think I might be having some technical issues.
Mark, I can hear you okay.
Okay, all right.
And others
so
hear
let me pursue. Sorry about that. So given the terrain it operates, mountainous, sandy, etc., and given the mode of transportation given to the agent, bicycle in most cases, we assign a certain radius of operation. And as long as there's sufficient market inside that radius of operation to keep the agent busy during the project, that's our approach. So,
or now we have sound problems.
To assign. Okay.
Stand by, everybody. Hopefully we'll get a better connection from Davis, California.
Has been lost.
Okay, now I can hear you. Mark?
Okay.
Okay.
Let me try again. So within the, okay, I think I'm back. So in that standard radius of operation of around 10 to 15 kilometers, if there's high density of population, that simply means that it's going to take longer for the PSP to saturate the market. And they could do that alone, or in many cases, they will pick apprentices to help them in that radius of operation. In areas where there's low population density, it might be tempting to say, well, why don't we increase the area assigned to the agent to give them more work? That doesn't work out since the distances will be greater for that person to cover, and supervision will become more difficult. So as long as there's enough market in the area for the agent to remain active during the project duration, that's covered, and it might take more or less time post-project for PSPs to saturate. So I'll have a very small illustration of this approach now. This is the village in which we're going to recruit a field agent, and we're telling the field agent that it's their responsibility to form groups in this village. Given the modes of transportation at their disposal, we can expect that they can go a certain number of kilometers in any direction from where they live. So villages that are reasonable for them to reach within an hour, maybe an hour and a half, we're going to assign to them. And as long as they can reach a village during a day, work with savings groups for a few hours, and come back during the same day, that's going to be the responsibility. Beyond that, we're going to close off the area. So this creates a radius of operation for an agent, and the next agent essentially will take care of the next villages beyond that radius of operation, and that becomes part of their areas. So you can see here that I've put a certain number of agents who create continuous coverage of a given area to eventually achieve saturation. So this is kind of a drops of oil approach, where you drop an agent down and that person can cover a reasonable area from where they operate. Field agents, adjacent field agents are entrusted to a supervisor who's a project staff, and depending on how aggressive the project is, a supervisor could be in charge of 6 or 8 field agents. So that's our approach to mapping and deploying of agents. Still in the prep phase, shifting now to agent recruitment. Agent recruitment is really key to our approach, since we're selecting some FAs and wanting to essentially set them up to be the service providers over the long term in the given area. So the exact profile of agents is going to depend on the strategy that people have chosen in terms of what other interventions they might want to put through that agent, mobility expectations, etc. The points to consider in the FA profile include the demographics you're looking for, the residents. It's really important to find people who are local residents and have a lot of stability as well as good social networks to operate. The skills that are required based on the methodology. People who have the right expectations and attitude, and in particular want to transition over to working for themselves as a PSP. We have some standards in terms of the types of experiences that are beneficial for agents to have in terms of work experience, development experience, etc. And we found some likelihood to be more or less compatible with taking on the extra responsibility of being a still field agent. So we have a starting point for the profile field agents, and we're refining that over time. So we have a standard questionnaire that we minister to all incoming field agents, and over time we correlate the successful FAs, the dropouts, people who produce more or less groups, in an attempt to refine the ideal profile over time. And this is really country by country, and in a sense we're increasing the predictive ability for profiling for agents. So once the profile is set, we go about recruitment, and I'll represent here the process we follow. So we have determined the communities or villages in which we want to recruit the agents, given the mapping and deployment strategy. Consulting local leaders. Depending on the context, we either take an advertising approach, where we share the opportunity broadly with community members, or we take a headhunting approach, where we go through local leaders and ask them to put forth some candidates. And in many cases, there's a combination of both approaches. What's very important to note is that the project makes the final selection, and so the community must put forward multiple applicants. Applicants are screened using a very simple screening tool that helps us eliminate the obvious no's, to be able to spend more time with a smaller number of candidates to put them through an interview. So what you see in the blue boxes are the process we follow, and in the document rules that to be able to screen applicants and then candidates. After the interview, we have a number of finalists. Ideally, we overtrain the member finalists, since there are some things you can see during training that don't really appear during a face-to-face interview, such as facilitation skills, a little bit of attitude, and how quickly people pick up the savings group methodology. After the training post-test is applied, and then a few people are selected to be FAs. So ideally, there's enough budget over training, which leads to a higher selection of FAs, and also can indicate who might be some potential replacements in the event there are dropouts. So it's really kind of a funnel process to target specific communities and look for the right people who are going to become FAs. So that's the process of recruitment with some of the tools that we use for that. Mentioned previously, during the FA phase, which is when the project pays the field agents and the groups are receiving free service, there's both a technical preparation, training for field agents, close supervision in the field, mentoring to develop their skills, as well as 2 refresher trainings that happen roughly at 3 and 6 months to consolidate some of the skills. But in parallel, there's equally as important a market preparation aspect. Really helps people be positioned. So what represented in this diagram are the villages in the area of operation. For one, the largest circle. The other villages are accessible to the field. What we recommend actually insist on with is what we call a seat.
Mark?
Forming freedoms. Yes.
Mark, I hate to interrupt you,
Yes.
but we're really experiencing some bad sound issues here. Can you hear me, Mark?
Okay. Maybe
Mark,
try and hear you.
Do you have do you happen to have a do you have a cable to connect with? Should have asked you this before the broadcast, but if you have a cable you can connect directly, you just have Wi-Fi?
Right. I just have the Wi-Fi here.
Yeah, okay.
So it seems
Okay.
to
Well,
back now. I do apologize
now.
about the sound quality. Let me start over on this
Okay.
slide.
Yes, please.
Okay, Christian approach, the seating approach, whereby each group is formed in the home village, or residence village of the FA, and the other groups are spread out in the other adjacent villages where the agent operates. So what you can see here are the groups that show up in green, and these are groups that are formed for free. So the benefit here is that by seating, the agent is creating some example groups in a number of communities for people to take interest and see the methodology. What it also does is it limits the expectation of free service, as any community is only seeing one free group being formed. Once the FA has been certified as a PSP, the task becomes to introduce some new groups that leverage the experience of the first group, but those are no longer free and communities have to pay. What I'm showing in blue are these fee-for-service groups that form, so the 7th, 8th, and so forth. So this is following the pattern of the free groups that have first been formed and then adding some fee-for-service groups later on. So what this results in is the desired situation at the time of certification, whereby community members, since they've seen it and they've heard about it, they value the methodology since they've seen the benefits of commemorating those pioneer communities to them via the project throughout their operation. And community members will pay for services as a result of the communication strategy by both the project and the agent that make it very clear that free service is a temporary period that will be followed after certification by the future service phase. The seating approach is the administered after.
Mark, I'm sorry, you're breaking up so badly that we can't even hear you.
Okay, let me disconnect and connect back to disconnect.
Stand by, everybody. I don't know if we've ever actually tried to disconnect and reconnect a panelist before, but we'll see how this works. This will be interesting. It's always an adventure.
Yes, sorry about that. I've reconnected now. Let's try this.
You actually sound better, Mark, so onward.
Okay. Onward. So the agent exam is administered after about 7 to 9 months, and it serves both to evaluate the quality of the work that's been done to date by the field agent, as well as validate the readiness of the agent to become PSP. And it also serves an important signaling function to really make very clear to the community the training period is over, this person has succeeded and is given back to the community as their agent. So it serves as a very, it's not only a check for the organization implementing the project, but an important signaling aspect. So to qualify to be examined, FAs must have formed at least 6 groups. The exam takes place between 7 and 9 months and is implemented by the project. So there are 3 tools. The first one looks back at the work done so far by the FA and looks at the satisfaction of group members with the services to date. So focus group discussions with 2 groups, about 6 to 10 members each, and there are open questions on 5 core themes on the services that the FA has provided, on the problem-solving skills of the agent on the group, the referrals they might have for other members, as well as recommendations for improvement, as well as the ability to promote on the methodology. Unlike most FGDs, these are scored with a scoring system that gives positive marks with members who are satisfied with services, and it has deductions in the event there were some harmful services. So that's worth 25% of the score. The next part, again looking back, is a portfolio scoring, looking at the performance of all the groups formed to date. So for this, there's a manual tabulation taken on the most recent data collection forms that have been submitted. In the computation of 7 indicators, they look at the productivity in terms of groups and members, as well as the group performance using some of the standard ratios that are found in the MIS. And so that's also worth 25%. So the first 50% are really looking back at the work done to date by the field agent. The remaining 50% of the exam is taken up by an oral exam that looks at the knowledge and attitude of the agent. So 3 panelists administer a standard questionnaire. 13 core questions, they have some pre-coded answers that are anticipated. And these look at deeper knowledge of the savings group methodology, to really get at some principles and some fundamentals, such as the importance of constitution, regular share-outs, etc. Also give some problems for the agent to solve. What would they do if X or Y happens? And also some questions that really look at the attitude and motivation and readiness of the agent to become a PSP. What are they trying to get out of this? What are they going to do in the first month, etc., etc. So all the tools for the exam are presented in the PSP manual. They can be adapted lightly to local context, translated, etc. But they've been really refined over the course of several cohorts of agents, and we found them to be quite user-friendly and quite effective at assessing agents. Let me speak now to an important aspect when the PSPs are operating on their own independently and are receiving payment from communities. So we've been able to develop a recommended payment structure so the PSPs really have a good idea of how they can approach communities and how they can be paid. And we've really endeavored to balance out the interests of PSPs and the interest of the community. So what I'm showing here on this slide are the criteria we've developed to be able to assess a payment structure from the groups. So as you can see, we have some left and right columns that really demonstrate a balance. So the amount of the payments have to be both affordable for group members, as well as attractive enough for the PSPs to keep doing this work. The form of payments, cash, in-kind, etc., has to both consider the group capacity to mobilize the payment as well as the PSP needs. So it might be easier for groups to pay in kind, but the PSP cannot really survive if all the groups in the portfolio are paying in kind. So typically we do recommend cash. The timing of the payments, meaning the frequency and the exact timing with respect to either the cycle or the season, have to consider both group capacity as well as PSP needs. Underlying all of this, the payments have to really represent payment for value. The PSP has to deliver value for the period, for the intervention. We want any payment arrangement to have a clearly defined time frame, which could be either an end date or an end event. What I mean by that, an end date could be September 2015, or it could be payment for one intervention, or an event could be payment until the first cycle share. That would be an example of an event. So taking all these criteria about the balancing payment for value and clearly defined time frame, one kind of final element is that the payment structure has to be simple to explain to group members and simple to implement for both groups and PSPs. So we developed these criteria with some stakeholder analysis during that first project I mentioned, looking and bringing together actually group members, PSPs, and project staff to look at experiences on the ground and distill an approach. What we came up with, in particular for the first cycle, is the following payment approach. So this slide shows actually the service delivery from an agent, in particular a PSP, to a group in its first cycle. So the blue bars at the bottom show the weekly meetings of the Silk group during its first cycle. The black boxes number 1 to 8 represent the training modules that are delivered to the group at the beginning of its first cycle. And then the purple boxes are the monitoring visits from the PSP. So as you know, is the case for many savings group methodologies, there's a decrease in the intensity of monitoring over the course of the first cycle, followed by a last training represented by the box number 9, which is the support to the share-out meeting. And so to ensure that both the PSP is incentivized to provide services throughout the first cycle, as well as to commit the group to really consume services throughout the first cycle, we've developed an approach whereby there is a PSP fee for every member in the group that's paid per month for the entire first cycle. In practice, the group sets up a third fund called the training fund, separate from the loan fund and the social fund. Every member has a fixed amount they're going to contribute, and in that sense it's very similar to the social fund, and the payment is linear throughout the first cycle. There's a high intensity of services that's delivered toward the beginning of the cycle. It reduces gradually and increases again for the share out. And groups thought it was easier to have a linear payment throughout the cycle. It represented kind of a linear, linear payment for value, and it's also better for the PSP to have this regular income than have all the income lumped at the end of the first cycle. After the first share out, when the group goes into a second or higher cycle, the PSP is paid strictly per service or per visit, breaking that first cycle package. Speak now briefly to PSP networks. CRS in its methodology organizes PSPs into informal peer associations that are known as networks. And I've shown here some 4 fundamental questions that we have to ask ourselves when setting up these networks, and we're still in reflection on that process. The first question is, does the PSP network add value to PSPs? Meaning, are they better off operating as members of a network as opposed to working on their own as a PSP? And is the PSP network demand driven? We don't want this to be a process that the project is imposing on PSPs and they might not be benefiting from it. The second question is, does the PSP network further the original objectives of the project, namely continued formation of groups at the highest quality? We want the network to be a mechanism that could kind of perpetuate this approach as opposed to going off track with other objectives, other activities. Third question, does the PSP network create risk or mitigate risk? I think that any time you set up a new structure, there's a new dynamic that takes place in terms of the aspirations of members, the leadership, the activities, etc. But it's also the case that the network could be a mechanism through which the behavior of PSPs is channeled and provides a good touch point for the implementing organization to stay in touch with the PSPs post-project. And finally, does the PSP network open up new opportunities for groups, PSPs, implementing partners, or the agency that originated this whole thing? And here I think there's a lot of opportunities that we have only started to tap into in terms of having access to organized PSPs, be able to channel new interventions through them, bringing new services for group members, diversifying their income streams, etc. Our process of developing networks is really demand-driven, whereby we have an informational session for PSPs. And if they're interested, they have to organize themselves to essentially host the trainers who come and build their capacity. There's no funding of networks, no equipment. It's really networks who have to want to come together to operate in a joint manner, and we simply facilitate the process. Some of the functions that are taken on by networks fall into 4 categories: support to PSPs. So mutual support among PSPs might be a better way of putting it. This includes marketing and promotion, collaboration, information sharing from people who are in the same catchment area. It's an opportunity to standardize the pricing of services across the network and to upgrade member skills by introducing new products and new services. There's a representation opportunity whereby the PSPs can promote the Silk approach and the PSP model to local stakeholders. There's also an important opportunity to enhance service quality through quality control and consumer protection mechanism. PSP networks realize that the brand is tied up in the behavior and the actions of each of the members, and as such they have an incentive to look out for what each of them is doing to not dilute the brand. And finally, an important function of networks is to develop its membership, and that's through management of the apprenticeship process, whereby PSPs who are facing extremely high demand in their area can recruit helpers, select typically group members who want to take this on, help develop them over time, and the network then certifies the new apprentices as PSPs using the same tools that the project had used to certify them. The apprentices also come in the event a PSP drops out, thereby leaving a gap in operating areas. The neighboring PSPs have taken on the task of recruiting an apprentice to eventually take on that area. So those are some of the processes and functions that are used during the course of a PSP model. There are many others, but those are some of the highlights. I wanted to highlight 3 levels of sustainability that we are able to achieve using the PSP model. The first level at the group level is that the savings group will continue functioning without ongoing external support, and CRS and other agencies have seen some good results of that with the study that was done by VSL Associates showing roughly 90% retention after 4 years. The second level up is the agent level, whereby the PSPs continue forming and supporting groups without financial support from the project. Again, we're seeing this happen during a project when the PSPs are working on their own, but the project is still there to monitor overall progress. And we've seen this post-project whereby PSPs still have market in their areas, are continuing to form groups and be paid even though the project is no longer in contact with them. And then finally, the area level sustainability is whereby in a given region there are enough active agents to satisfy the demand for Silk services. And the network is really instrumental to achieve this area level sustainability. PSPs have more success and are better motivated to keep doing this work as a result of being networked, and they're able to recruit apprentices to really complement the supply side and ensure that there are enough service providers available. So a quick slide on the PSP implementation manual, which Bill and I have both referred to. is divided into 4 modules. They cover the 4 main phases: preparation, FA, PSP, and networks. Each module is followed by relevant tools, and I've alluded to some of them here. That goes anywhere from job descriptions to interview guides, to the exam tools, to the tools that the networks are going to use. Selected tools are illustrated inline, so they're filled in and shown as an illustration in the manual with some explanations. And there also exists a companion Excel file that goes with the PSP manual. And that includes stipend calculators, outreach projections, and other Excel tools that are used to manage the project. So all of those will be discussed in much more at length in the training in Rwanda that's coming up in November. And this concludes the presentation part of today's session. I do apologize for the audio hiccups at time, and I hope that I'm able to field the questions that you're going to have now. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I think we pretty much solved the sound except for about a 5 or 6 minute period. So hopefully people can struggle through, and if they listen to the recording again, they can look at the slides and kind of figure out the context and get it from there. But we do have a number of questions, so I think I'll get right to them. So this is a question from Jordan Bailey, and he asks, have you seen success with implementing the PSP model in areas that already use traditional savings groups, not a pay-for-service model? So in other words, kind of going into an area where traditional savings group organization has happened and then bringing in the PSP model.
Great question. So we've had some experience with that, and this, I'd say, has been mixed. In areas where there has been savings groups in the past, if there hasn't, first of all, if there's saturation, it doesn't make any sense to go there. If there hasn't been saturation, and if there's no mechanism left in place, meaning there are no agents who are still active, we found that members are interested in this approach. The challenge then becomes if there's a difference in how the model was introduced. For example, if the previous project provided cash boxes, we don't provide cash boxes. If the previous project had operated strictly for free, we're going to operate for free for a short while and then switch to fee-for-service. And so I would say it's more difficult to operate in that environment because we have to overcome previous expectations, have very clear communication. Ultimately, we found that the quality of the services provided by our PSPs spoke for itself, and people might not have been happy about paying for it, but it's a service they wanted. No one else was there to provide it. If there's an ongoing project or ongoing mechanism in place, I think it really doesn't make sense to open up that area. As much as possible now, we try and pick clean areas where there haven't been savings group projects in the past, since we feel that that's going to be the easiest way for this model to take hold, as well as the most efficient use of resources to get more output from any given investment.
All right, thank you, Mark. Paul Rippey has asked a battery of questions here, so get ready.
Okay.
Paul says, I'm curious to what extent an institution that isn't CRS can follow the PSP approach. Are there examples of other facilitating agencies adopting this? If so, how was that? And what do you think is a necessary profile of an institution to do PSP? Is the bar higher for PSP than VSLA? That is, does it require more resources, commitment, or skills to do PSP than the standard VSLA/village agent model?
Okay. So the PSP methodology was developed by CRS working with our implementing partners under a Gates-funded project in East Africa. Since then, we've taken it to other countries, and in some of the countries in which CRS operates, we've operated in consortia, working with other INGOs or other NGOs. I can think of Malawi, Zambia, and now coming up in Sudan. And in those cases where CRS has been the technical lead, we have worked with those other organizations to implement a PSP approach. So I don't think it's PSP versus VSLA. I think VSLA and Silk as the group level methodology are roughly equivalent, have some differences. I think it's more about the PSP versus the FOVA. So as I mentioned previously in the slide, the FOVA approach is a two-level approach where you have staff that first opens up groups, then recruits community agents from those groups to serve the area over a long time. Ours is a two-hat approach where you go directly to community agents and then transition those over to being the local agents over the long term. In terms of the investment, I haven't done a side-by-side to look at the level of resources. I would say that, as you might have gleaned from the presentation, the approach is fairly regimented. I mean, there's the series of steps to follow along the way, from the recruitment to the specific trainings we run to the certification and the formation of networks. So I think it's, I would say, more comprehensive approach and requires more dedication, perhaps. I think that in terms of the skills that the implementers have to bring to it, I don't think it requires more skills. There might be more components to it, but I don't think it's. I feel that it's quite easy to implement.
And would this mean that it's a more expensive model per group?
Well, that's an interesting question. It might be that during the course of the project, there's more investment that goes in, although you're working with fewer staff since you're working with community agents from the beginning. I think the expense is one part of it, but the bigger picture has to encompass the return on that expense, the return on investment, which manifests post-project. To some extent, I feel that the shorter these PSP projects are, the better, since we're really setting the conditions for the agents to be successful in the market, helping them get started, and then getting out of the way. So I think that what the PSP model does help organizations do is have short projects. They leave in place an infrastructure that is going to continue for the long term. I also think that we're just now, it's taken us longer than we would have liked, we're just now starting to see the real long-term benefits of having the other interventions which we can leverage onto these agents. And by virtue of them being organized and having large portfolios, we're able to be much more effective in leveraging the infrastructure of agents and groups to try other development projects on top of those.
Great. Jude Jonathas from Haiti has asked this question, which is, I think, more or less answered in the presentation, but in your previous responses. But what is the difference between the village agent VSLA model and the PSP? You think we can implement this model in an area who is new to this approach of savings groups, especially for members to pay for the PSP?
I think it's actually, as I mentioned briefly, I think it's actually better to go into clean area, because even though people might not yet know what savings groups are about, they're going to pick it up quickly. And if the communication has been right from the beginning, that there's going to be a transition, there's this two-phase approach, people will have to pay at some point, people, I think, are very accepting of that. And if the agent is positioned correctly as someone who's coming from the community, is participating in a training program for a short period of time, and then is being given back to the community, they take responsibility for really supporting and remunerating that person. So I think actually that's the best situation in which to start. And yes, you have to work in the face of other development interventions about training, about handouts, construction, etc. They have been free. And people have to change their mindset about this, but it is possible to do it, and I think it's beneficial.
Great. Jordan Bailey, who asked a previous question, has a follow-up. Can you give an example of a region or area where the PSP model was not accepted by the members or communities, and why did this happen?
Well, I wouldn't say that there's been an area in which it's not been accepted at all. I think that the areas that have had the longest exposure, the longest recent exposure to handouts and free programs, etc., that has created an expectation that this is the way development organizations operate. And if the same organization is now coming with a new approach, that can create some confusion. Again, it's not impossible to overcome. It's done by proper communication. I think that the agents that have been selected also play a big role, and that's why the recruitment of the FAs is, we're so careful about this. We go through so many steps to really get the right person who is not only going to have the right skills is going to have the right profile and the right networks to be able to really convince people that this is the way they want to operate and are not timid and not shy about asking for payment.
So you really need people with entrepreneurial kind of skills or inclination in some respect.
Definitely. And so the way we screen for that is looking for people who have had previous experiences of trying something new and succeeding, trying something new and failing, being a business person. So we have to balance out, this entrepreneurial spirit as well as someone who, does want to do community work, wants to help their community, etc. And the questionnaire I alluded to that we administer to all new agents gets to these aspects, and over time we're going to study the data to see who succeeds, who drops out, etc., to improve that predictive profiling for recruiting new agents.
Great. Well, I have another question now from Dawit Kebede. Dawit is actually from Ethiopia, and he's actually working on a PSP model and deploying about 45 field agents to do the field work. And the question is, what kind of mechanism can I or we use to assure the sustainability of PSPs?
Wow. Well, I think it's really a comprehensive package. It's really, starting from the point of design and having in mind the PSP model. So one thing we found is that some projects, they have started on a different approach by picking people to be volunteers or stipend-driven agents, etc., then wanted to do a retrofit, which is to kind of change course and say, well, let's now use the PSP as an exit strategy. What's really important is to think of the PSP as an entry strategy. So you deploy people with that in mind. You pick people with the PSP model in mind. You remunerate them for that short while with the PSP model in mind. You communicate to the market from day one about what Silk is, who these agents are, etc., with that in mind. And so I think it's something that has to be done right from the beginning, and it has to permeate all the decisions that go into setting up the project. So anytime there's a decision that's made, it has to be with that transition to fee-for-service and the sustainability in mind. Once agents have already become PSPs, I think that the project still has a role in positioning them, helping convince people that yes, they are channeling the truth, they're no longer being paid by the project. The more positioning there has been up front, the shorter the transition period is going to be. I also think that organizing people into networks, and the networks can be successful if people aren't spaced too far apart, if it makes sense for them to get together, and that can provide some kind of glue for them to support each other, go help someone who's having trouble mobilizing, and that helps them remain engaged. So under a new MasterCard funded program that we're doing now, we're actually going to be doing some experimentation around the networks and looking for data that that makes a stronger case for the greater sustainability of networked PSPs.
It'll be interesting to see what you find out from that. What is the duration of that MasterCard research?
So the project is 4 years. We've just wrapped up the first year now, and we're just on the verge of certifying our first PSPs in West Africa under the project. And so we're going to be starting networking early in the next year, and it's going to take at least, it's another 1.5 to 2 years to get some solid results out of that.
We'll have to have you come back for a future webinar and give us an update on that. I have one more question from Leslie Puth, and she asks, are PSPs more typically male or female, or is it pretty evenly split according to gender?
Great question. So what we have found in our projects so far is they have tended to be majority male. To some extent, again, that goes back to design. So if you have a certain expectation of the number of hours an agent should be putting into this and the mobility in terms of how they get around, and that's very culturally driven in some cases, and how far you want them to go, we found that fewer women want to take this on, but then it becomes our task to really make an effort at recruitment. Where we've been most successful, and I can think of some projects in Tanzania, is that when the partner has insisted that the finalist had to include an equal number of men and women, we've had an opportunity at the last point of selection to pick, and we've had a higher percentage of female participants. We found that if we recruit women, they do just as good a job as men in terms of the quality of the groups and even productivity, but there might be fewer women who want to travel the distances and put in the hours. So I think it's really up to the recruitment process to give projects a chance to recruit women. What we do found, though, is that that's on the FA PSP level, meaning the agents who are recruited by the projects. When we go down to the apprentice level, since those are recruited from among the ranks of group members, those tend to be much more female. So as the project deepens, as there are more and more apprentices who come to deepen the delivery capacity, the overall balance tends to shift more towards women.
Well, Mark, I have made a little bit of a mistake here, which is a good mistake, which is that there are a whole slew of questions that have come in, and they were below my view on my bar here, and so I'm going to let everybody know that we are going to continue on with these questions, and we'll go over the 1 hour mark, but I think the questions are really good, and so I want to make sure that we don't leave them out. So I'm going to forge ahead here with a question from Alexi Taylor-Grossman. This is Alexi Taylor-Grossman from Making Sense International. We found that many BSL participants benefit from complementary non-financial services and have worked with both with Plan and CRS to develop live learning sessions that are built as add-ons to the weekly meetings. Can you speak to the challenges and success that the PSPs have had with supporting Silk group members and with these complementary services once they are working as fee-for-service providers as opposed to field agents?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great opportunity to be able to leverage the skills and the relationships of agents to bring new trainings to members. We have had some experience in introducing new trainings through PSPs when they were operating on fee-for-service basis, and that was first and foremost a business skills training that was rolled out in East Africa, and we found good receptivity. PSPs wanted to deliver this, members wanted it, so that worked out well. I think the things to consider are the timing of when to introduce the additional skill. And traditionally, I think in a free model, we look at the groups. Here, we're more concerned about the timing from the perspective of the PSP. We want people to be certified first as quickly as possible. We want them to be launched in the market and forming groups fee-for-service because that's the primary engine. Then we want to introduce an additional skill. So far we've only worked with models that we think people are willing to pay for. There are others, financial education, health trainings, etc., where members might not be willing to pay for. So I think we need to test the limits of what can be done fee-for-service. And we haven't done so yet, but I think we at some point will experiment with third-party payment, whereby the project would pay the PSP to deliver trainings that the market will not pay for. And it could be a very cost-effective way of an organization to get out additional trainings since the trainers are on the ground. They have some facilitation skills, and they've got an organized portfolio with which to work. But we haven't experimented with that yet.
Okay, Sophie Tessier has asked the question, I'd like Mark to elaborate about quality control. My experience is that community agents / promoters and even NGO FAs do lose quality in the service they provide. I think there's a good need of qualified supervision, and I'm not sure that the PSP network can provide this professional supervision plus training refreshment. Good question.
Well, I wouldn't disagree that PSP network is probably not going to be as strong as professional project staff to follow up on them. They're certainly not going to kind of cross-check each other as often as a supervisor would. But I don't think that's unique to the PSP model. Any agent who's left behind post-project is working on the basis of the skills they have, the motivation they have. And I think that the network provides an extra layer of quality control compared to what would happen with an unnetworked agent or unnetworked PSP. In our East Africa pilot over 4 years, we did a randomized control. I'll spare you the details. They looked at the project paid agents versus group paid agents, and what we did find is that the performance of groups that were formed by PSPs in terms of group size, savings amounts, return on savings, etc. Those groups had higher performance than the groups that were formed by project paid agents. Our hypothesis is that since groups were paying for services, they demanded more out of their agent, perhaps in terms of attendance to meetings, quality services, etc. So I think that their consumers can demand more than someone who's the recipient of a free service from their agent. We do have some tools in place. We do have some tools for networks to do some regular cross-checks, and it comes down ultimately to the motivation of networks to undertake this. So I agree it's not going to be as good as a project, but it's better than what would happen in the absence of a project that has simply wrapped up.
All right. A couple more questions here. Elke Jans Harms has asked a question. It sounds like the training and examination process will weed out most problems, but what happens if a group is not happy with its PSP? Is there a mechanism for registering complaints in case of misconduct?
Well, first of all, the process, the 7 to 9 month process of taking an FA up to examination, we don't kind of hope that everything's going to be okay. For the people who are not performing, they're replaced early, in particular at the 2-month mark before the first refresher. So we have an opportunity after 2 months if we see that some people are not working out, or even if they're borderline, we don't take the risk, we replace them with someone else to leave a better person in place. We have set up on an experimental basis, and this is a new project in Kenya, a recourse mechanism whereby groups can reach out to the project directly in the event that they're very unhappy with the performance of their agent, or in case there's a consumer protection issue. So so far there hasn't been in a PSP model yet because it's still in place in the FA stage, and so people are asking methodology questions. They're asking, are you really paying the agent now? Is it going to stop later? So it's more clarification, and we have yet to see whether that's going to be an effective mechanism over the long term.
Okay, great. This is a question from Paul Rippey regarding your answer previously to him, so I don't know if you remember way back then, but he asked, did you inadvertently conflate entrepreneurship, in quotes, and motivated primarily by money, excluding social entrepreneurs who have other motivations?
Did I conflate? I can't recall.
Yeah.
I think it's about having someone who has well, irrespective of terminology, I think they were looking for people who have entrepreneurial spirit, and we do want people who are motivated by money, because I think that with a given investment that we're making in agents in terms of selecting them, training them, supervising them, we want the biggest return in terms of output. And I think that people who don't have a financial stake in this are going to spend less time per week or per month doing this work. I think they might have lower career output, and they're certainly not going to travel as far. And so I think that to get a bigger return on investment, we do need people who are going to be benefiting from this financially, and who are making enough money to stay in the game and to provide more output. Where the balance lies in the profile, frankly, no one knows. And in our new MasterCard project, we are really making a push for deeper poverty outreach than we've been able to achieve in the past. And this goes in recruitment. I think it has a lot to do with communication and just giving a sense of social responsibility to the PSPs we work with. This might translate into PSPs who are willing to give some discounts to some community members and kind of cross-subsidize their own portfolios. And I think there's just a lot more work that has to be done in that regard. Paul, I hope that's satisfactory, but if not, please chime back in.
Okay, a couple more. This is a question from Moro Bukhari, who is asking the question, actually he says, has CARE already implemented the PSP model, but has CRS already implemented the PSP model in Ghana? And if so, what lessons can you learn with us? What lessons can you share with us? You're not doing this in Ghana yet, right?
Well, one of my colleagues has, from headquarters, has just recently been working with our Ghana program, and that's getting off the ground now. No, actually, I take that back. There was one previous project in Ghana. I think it was in northern Ghana. I actually don't have the details on that, but there is something on the ground. I think it was relatively small scale, and we're making a bigger push now. I'd be happy to get a person's email and kind of link them to the right person to follow up on that.
Okay, great. I'm going to actually ask one more question and then do a little promo on our workshop in Rwanda. So this is actually Jude's Jonathan, who is, or maybe it's Jonathan from Haiti. Good question is, does CRS follow up the PSP after the program? How can the PSP keep contact with the movement? Because the NGO programs are so short and movement of savings groups is dynamic, how does the PSP know when there's modifications in the system if the NGO isn't there anymore?
Great question. So CRS mainly works with local Catholic partners, the dioceses, and so the dioceses have a permanent presence in the areas where they operate. What we found is the dioceses aren't so much proactive going out toward networks, but they are there in case there's an issue that arises or if the network reaches out to them. And we've had several instances whereby, and this is in Kenya in particular, whereby we've done new interventions that leverage the existing PSP networks. One of them is to sell physical products. That's happening right now in Western Kenya. And another one is in the spread of e-recording, which some people might have heard of. This is a smartphone, Android-based record keeping for groups. And so we're reaching out, we're going to reach out to PSP networks from a previous closed project, train up the PSPs on this upgrade to the group methodology, and they're going to be rolling this out to interested members. So in this case, we're reaching out to them to say, hey, there's something new we could roll out to them. So it's based on us, but since we know where they are, it's easy for us to follow up on them. In terms of studies, we have just concluded a study in Tanzania, which isn't released yet, and actually haven't seen it, to look at what happened about 2 years post-project in Tanzania with PSPs, with networks, to look at sustainability, continued service provision, diversification of partnerships. And I think we'll be putting that up soon to have people have a look at what's happened in this kind of medium-term post-project, which is of great interest to us.
All right. Well, there was one other question that I'm going to kind of use as a way to promote our workshop. And the question was, when is the next CRS PSP workshop? And to answer that question, it's actually going to be November 11th to the 15th. It'll be in Kigali, Rwanda. And we'll also be doing another 2 savings group training workshops, savings group program design and implementation management, November 3rd through the 7th, and savings group management information systems, November 11th through 15th. And you can get all that information on the SMDP website. And the other part of that question, Mark, was are there any plans to do training and implementation of the PSP model in Spanish?
Well, Spanish not as of yet. The materials exist in English and French, and as you know, the manual has been translated in French. As we develop trainings, I kind of keep that up in both languages. We haven't shifted over to Spanish yet, and there are no immediate plans, no.
Okay, great. All right, well, I appreciate everybody sticking with us, and I think the question's been really great. I really appreciate you giving such thoughtful answers, Mark. Apologize for the difficulty in the 5 or 6 minutes that we had some transmission issues, but I think by and large the rest of the webinar was able to be heard pretty well, and reminding everybody that there is a recording of this be up on our website in a day or two, so you can come back and listen to it if you weren't able to get it all. And we also will put a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation, and well, we'll put a link to the PSP manual, which people will be interested in. And I would just say, really keep your eyes on this program. This is a really exciting new way of reaching out to expand savings groups in a quality way. There's been a tremendous amount of effort by Mark and his team to make sure that this is going to be implemented in a way that's going to be sustainable and useful to everybody involved. And we're very curious to see how it scales up and how it reaches the big numbers that are projected. So Mark, thanks so much. Really appreciate you being here with us today from Davis, California, as opposed to where you usually are in East Africa. And I want to remind people, if you want to be a part of the training that Mark will be delivering in Rwanda, please visit our website. We still have a few seats left, and we'd love to have you there. I also want to put in a plug for our upcoming webinar, Sharia Compliant Microfinance, What and Where Is It and What Can It Teach Us, with Malcolm Harper on Thursday, November 19th. As I said, we will have a link for that webinar coming up on the site soon. So I want to thank everybody for their attentiveness, and Mark for your being with us today, and CRS for the great work they're doing to make the savings group movement larger and more robust and more resilient. And I wish everybody a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and we'll hopefully see you at the next SMP webinar. Thank you so much.